This is the Trust the Profits Barn Tour. We are taking a look at the Tim Yakteen trained barn and also one that falls under Bob Baffert. What's up, everybody? My name's Colin Sheehan. This is Trust the Profits YouTube page. I'm with my colleague Matthew DeSantis, and we are taking a page out of his Breeders' Cup Barn Tours, which did so well, and taking a look at the trainers that have multiple entries in the 2023 Kentucky Derby. That is Tim Yakteen, Todd Pletcher, and Brad Cox. Be sure to check out the other two on this channel. However, in this video, we are going to look at the Tim Yakteen barn. Matthew DeSantis, how we doing?
Doing great. Excited to talk about this trainer in particular. I was really interested in the West Coast horses this year. Obviously, with Bob Baffert still serving his 2-year suspension from Churchill Downs. One of these horses was in his barn previously, but one of these is, as I used to recall it, and a lot of people, the original Yakteen horse, Practical Move. So exciting dynamics, I think, out there. And I think an exciting time to maybe think about transitions in West Coast horse racing.
Well, let's start there. Let's remind our viewers who maybe haven't been tuning in since last year. If we bring up the Tim Yakteen trained horses that have been in the Kentucky Derby, you see Taba and Messier. But let's remind them, Matt, why those horses were in his barn.
Yeah, so both of those were originally Bob Baffert trained horses, but due to the positive drug test of Medina Spirit in the 2021 Kentucky Derby, Churchill Downs instituted a 2-year ban on any horses trained by Bob Baffert running in their track, and particularly on, obviously, the Kentucky Derby and Kentucky Oaks Day. Therefore, if any previously trained Baffert horses wanted to get into the Kentucky Derby, they had to be moved to another trainer's barn in order to be eligible to run. And so last year, Messier and Taba both ran for Bob Baffert. Then, in about a month prior to the Kentucky Derby, they were transferred to Tim Yakteen's barn, so they would then be eligible to run. This year, Churchill Downs changed the rules a little bit, and you had to transfer these horses a little bit earlier that Bob Baffert has, but again, still not eligible to enter those horses. And those horses that he had this year have been kind of strewn around the country to several different trainers, including Tim Yakteen.
Yeah, and Taba and Messier didn't factor in last year's Kentucky Derby really at all. With a 12th and a 15th place finish, it was kind of like a, are they really Tim Yakteen horses or are they Bob Baffert horses, which was the first question I got on the Chicken Dinner podcast. And it was, for us horse players, that awkward question you had to go through. But this year, Tim Yakteen is back with 2 entries into the Kentucky Derby. And so we have one horse that follows the same path as last year, which is Reincarnate, moving from the Bob Baffert barn. But Tim Yakteen has his own horse this year that he trained, which is Practical Move. What do you think that the implications of Tim Yakteen having his own horse make the Kentucky Derby are for him in particular?
Well, I think it's really big for him as his progression as a big name in the sport, and certainly as a West Coast trainer. If he can show the ownership groups out west that he can take a horse from being a 2-year-old colt through the Derby process and into the Kentucky Derby and potentially run and win one of these Triple Crown races, I think that really gives a lot of the ownership groups out in California confidence in moving better and better horses into his barn later on. And Bob Baffert is, in his upper 70s at this point, is not going to be around forever. And so looking at where these ownership groups might go after Bob Baffert retires from racing, perhaps, I think it's interesting if Tim Yakteen can assert himself as a Kentucky Derby winning or Kentucky Derby caliber trainer, then they might feel more comfortable moving those horses into him and could certainly increase the size of his operation out in California. Should be pointed out, Yakteen, a former Bob Baffert assistant, already has a good relationship with a lot of these different ownership groups.
All right, let's start with Practical Move as we look at the 2 individual horses that are trained by Tim Yakteen. Practical Move had some key victories: the Santa Anita Derby, the San Felipe, and the Los Al Futurity. Those are his last 3 races, all of which Ramon Vasquez had the mount on for Practical Move. I have a great spotlight video coming up this week that you'll want to check out, where I highlight some really specific tendencies for the trips that Practical Move has gotten. Also, if you run through his comments, a lot of it is related to the beginnings that he had, whether it's stumbled or hit the gate or started slow. I think some of those are deceiving, where it's not as bad as what it might say. One of them was pretty bad. and so check out that video for sure. But what I am concerned about with Practical Move, and a lot of people probably are, is the sire Practical Joke, and that brings into question the distance. And does Practical Move want the distance? He has a 6.5 average winning distance according to Brisnet, which is very low in comparison to what you're trying to achieve in the Kentucky Derby, and also in comparison to the other horses that are in the race. And when you look at those trips, Ramon Vasquez learned this horse needs to save ground. And all three of those trips, he got right to the inside and sat right behind the leader. He likes a target to run at. And I think it's a little deceiving in the way he finished those races because of how much ground saving rides he had along the rail. That's my concern about Practical Move. Obviously, the Santa Anita Derby was very impressive. Not mistaken, he has a triple-digit buyer figure, right? He's one of only three with two Hills and Forte. Right? Forte's that has one.
Forte has one as a 2-year-old. And then interestingly, Mandarin Hero, who actually finished second that day, also had a triple-digit buyer speed rating in the Santa Anita Derby. But yeah, listen, I had a lot of the same concerns you did as well, which is the sire pedigree of Practical Joke. Typically, the offspring are much more precocious sprinters, much better going one turn. Stretching out and going 2 turns is certainly a little bit of a question mark, I think, at that point. So you are worried about, can he get 10 furlongs? Now, he got 9 furlongs in that Santa Anita Derby, as you mentioned. But, getting that extra furlong is going to be difficult. And then the rail trip is something that is just really fascinating. And that was him obviously winning the San Felipe initially, and then now coming for home here in the Santa Anita Derby. And, it's interesting to see how he's able to really carve out this trip in the Kentucky Derby with such a large field. It's one thing to be able to get that inside stalking trip when there's 7 or 8 horses in a race. Trying to get that trip when there's 20 horses in a race, good luck with that. And you can see at 9 furlongs, he's really getting tested by Mandarin Hero and Skinner there at the end. And that's a pretty speed favoring track. And those 2 horses that he was challenged by were really closers, fighting the track as much as anybody else.
Yeah, and in that Spotlight Series, I'll talk about when you go back to his first win, which was technically, he won by disqualification because Fort Bragg, first of all, pushed him out wide. He did a good job cutting in and getting down to the rail in the stretch run. Then Fort Bragg came in on him again. If you take the race after the treble happens, so the treble happens, it's clear that Practical Move is going to be moved up. But after that point, Practical Move is a length ahead of Fort Bragg. And Fort Bragg re-rallies and blows by him. And that was the one race where he was wide because, to get to that point in the race. This was before Ramon Vasquez took over. And I think that just speaks to a little bit of if it's if he's got that wide trip, or if he going the mile and a quarter is going to be really detrimental to Practical Move. His running style is a P7 with Brisnet, which shows P's a little interesting. He's a presser, but he's going to be within 2 lengths of the lead at the first call, which is generally where he has been. He seems to like a target to run at.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he's a horse, again, has benefited from smaller field sizes out in California to some extent. He's not had to deal with huge fields. There's been some very notable scratches, I think, that have taken place, particularly Go Rocket Ride on the day of the Santa Anita Derby. And interestingly enough, National Treasure was a notable scratch on the day of the San Felipe Derby, and the San Felipe Stakes, I should say, the race before that. But listen, while we've been listing off all of these things that we do, I think, legitimately have issues with Practical Move, it's important to point out he's one of the few horses that has really swept his region in this Derby prep season. He's gone out and he's won the Los Alamitos Futurity and the San Felipe and the Santa Anita. Every race he's gone into, he's won. Now, you could say the California circuit is a little diluted because Bob Baffert's horses were kind of dispersed across the country this year. And horses like Hijazi were really more sprinters. And a horse like National Treasure had some health issues. Cave Rock, we haven't seen. He's gone into witness protection program somewhere. Faustin, same sort of thing. Those horses remained in Bob Baffert's barn, and so they're not eligible, and they haven't been running. So it is fair to question how good has the competition been that he's beaten out there in California. But if you look through a lot of these other circuits, not a lot of other horses have been sweeping through these circuits, and so it's impressive. Just he gets the job done. Can he get it done in 10 furlongs? I'm probably not a sold, but I think he's a really nice horse who's going to go back up to California after this race. I think win a lot of stakes races as later as a 3-year-old and 4-year-old.
Can't blame Angel of Empire for switching circuits and beating both of them, though.
No, absolutely not. No, and that was Angel of Empire, very good horse, although lost to Smarty Jones, finished second in that race to victory formation. So, a second and two first. Forte obviously only ran in those two Florida preps as well. But again, you're talking about horses in Angel of Empire and Forte, who a lot of people are thinking is, the top and second choice in the Kentucky Derby. We're not talking about Practical Move in that same way. We're talking about Practical Move as like, maybe like the fifth or sixth or seventh choice for some people.
Hey, he beat that gigantic field of 8 in the Santa Anita Derby, which is gigantic for years past.
It is.
So now we go back to the other horse that is trained by Tim Yakteen that was moved from the Bob Baffert barn. He was moved early, though. He was actually moved on January 8th. So that was actually before the Rebel. Part of that was probably to get the points, because running under the Bob Baffert barn, you're not eligible for the points. He ran first in the Sham. He's had Johnny Velasquez aboard. He's sired by Good Magic, who's obviously from Curlin, out of a Scat Daddy dam. So the distance is a little bit less of a question for Reincarnate. Reincarnate was a horse I was really interested in. I thought he had a really tough trip in the Rebel. I was really excited to play him back in the Arkansas Derby. Unfortunately, everyone else saw that because the price was 3-1.
Yeah.
And he just didn't get there. So he finished third in the Arkansas Derby, third in the Rebel. Generally, you want to see a horse definitely win the last prep race, if not kind of finish second. He doesn't check either of those boxes. Where are you with Reincarnate?
I think he's a perfectly fine horse. I think, like you, I was looking for an improved effort in that Arkansas Derby. I agreed with you. I thought he had tons of trouble in the Rebel and still managed to run on for third place. Was kind of partially interfered with, I think, as well, by a horse coming down the stretch. That was just a rough day for Reincarnate. And so I thought, well, he's definitely going to come back in the Arkansas Derby against a field that I thought was gettable for him. And Angel of Empire just was so much the best that day. And then, he finishes second. King Russell, I believe, King Russell finishes second. He finishes third. We should say that kind of second, third, fourth, fifth, all kind of throw a blanket over those. They were all kind of pretty close to each other, finishing well behind Angel of Empire. But yeah, I mean, he's a horse that, unlike last year with Messier and Taba, he's actually been, to your point, with the Yakteen barn for a while. And he's actually run 2 races for Tim Yakteen, whereas Messier and Taba never ran 1 race for Tim Yakteen before the Kentucky Derby. So, maybe Yakteen is still trying to figure this horse out and trying to figure out how this horse operates best. It should be pointed out, this horse has also been jet setting and getting a ton of frequent flyer miles, because he's been running in Oaklawn, but he's been flying back out to California and training at Santa Anita this entire time. So he's been going back and forth cross country every couple of months.
Yeah, it's puzzling to me. I don't know why you would not just leave him on the East Coast, but I don't train, so it's not my money, and it's not for me to discuss. But just from an outsider's viewpoint of like, well, I understand not maybe wanting to race him against your own, especially against Practical Move, but whatever. I'm not an expert in that area, so I'm not going to pretend to be. His running style is EP5, though, which is a very positive running style to have in years past in the Kentucky Derby. That's your most likely running style to win. Don't forget, Rich Strike was an outlier last year with the way he closed. This is a horse that wants to be on the lead, or with at least within 1 to 3 lengths of the leader in the first call. Do you think Reincarnate sort of sitting forwardly placed and has an impact on what the overall pace will be of this race?
I think he could. I see him more as a presser than necessarily on the lead. I think he kind of fits in a little bit behind a horse like Verifying, or a little bit behind a horse like King's Barnes. I think he probably sits with horses like a Wild on Ice, maybe a horse like Mage, if he can get away a little bit better, kind of sitting that second group, that second flight, kind of right behind the leaders. And so that's kind of part of the reason I don't want to give up on Reincarnate, is he does have the right running style. And in this horse, you go back and watch that Sham, so good in that Sham. He looks so good that day. This horse has talent, and really, this horse also really matured between 2 and 3. And you just feel like this horse has a big race in him. And how many times do you go back to the well, though, is the concern. How many times do you get fooled and you go, oh, another day, and he finishes third again? That said, I could absolutely see him hitting the board. That would not shock me at all. If Reincarnate finishes third yet again, and as he did in the first 2 Derby preps. So he's got the right running style for this race. I don't know if he can put it all together, though. It just seems like he always has some sort of an excuse for why it doesn't end up working out that well.
Tim Yakteen, which he's not going to say it publicly. I
Yeah.
think, I think we can guess which one that he's cheering for.
Yeah, I mean, listen, he's got to be cheering for Practical Move the most. I mean, listen, he's going to be ecstatic if either of these horses wins the Kentucky Derby. Don't get me wrong. But Practical Move is really a homegrown horse for him. And that's one that is going to mean a lot for him, and it's going to mean a lot for his reputation, and it's going to mean a lot for his barn's future if they can end up winning this with Practical Move. And like I said, I like that horse a lot, and I was always impressed by that horse. I bet on that horse in the San Felipe Stakes. I like that horse a lot in the Santa Anita Derby, and he came through both times. But it is concerning that the pedigree is concerning, and the inside rail trips are concerning because you're just not going to carve out that trip, especially if he's breaking from anywhere outside like the 10th post position. I mean, good luck trying to get to the rail from there. And so Ramon Vasquez is going to have his hands full trying to pull that sort of a ride off. And, if he goes wide, then I think he can kind of cross the line through Practical Move. But I still think these are very intriguing horses to be following. And these are horses that are going to be attracting a lot of attention by NBC on the Kentucky Derby coverage. And a lot of people are going to be familiar because Reincarnate was trained by Bob Baffert, and Yakteen, obviously last year with these two runners, has one of his own now with Practical Move. So exciting barn to take a look at, and one that I'm personally interested in just seeing how he continues to develop over the next few years out in the West Coast.
Do you want anything to do with Practical Move if he's outside like the 8 post?
Probably not. He's going to have to be a horse that draws like 5, 6, 7. I'd like, usually I don't want him too far inside, but like if he draws 5, 6, 7, he could end up getting the trip that he wants. That's for sure. Now, whether he'll be there at the end, we'll see. But, he could get at least the setup that works for him.
If there's one horse that I, in this race, think could win from the one hole, like if you had to say, the one hole is the dreaded slot.
Mm-hmm.
If they said, okay, you have to pick one horse who you think could win from the one hole, I would probably be Practical Move for me based on what I've watched in his races, his replays.
I could see that. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, it's the type of trip that he wants, and he's fast enough to get away and not get shuffled back. And so, especially if he draws, because we've talked about the dearth of speed in this race. So if the horse, if he draws like Sun, Thunder, and Angel Empire next to him, no problem. He'll breeze right by those two, and he'll be sitting pretty. So that is an interesting kind of thought process, and we'll just have to wait until the Monday of the Kentucky Derby to see how they draw these races. And then all the talking that we've done to this point could all go out the window. We have to recalculate who we think is going to win the Kentucky Derby once that all happens. But it's fun to go through this exercise, though, and just think about how these trainers think about this race, particularly since these are two horses that have very similar running styles and that they're going to be pretty close to the lead, and they're going to be probably within a length or two of each other, I would imagine, most of this entire trip.
All right, that'll wrap up our barn series, but I have to ask you first. I know that you said on the Todd Pletcher video that's probably the barn you would take over these 3, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would you take Cox's barn over the Tim Yakteen barn?
Yes, I would.
Now, would you take Tim Yakteen over all the other barns?
No, I would not. I would take Larry Ravelli's barn. I would take the Japanese barns. I would take a few other barns over Tim Yakteen, and that's no shot at Tim Yakteen. It speaks to how, quite frankly, wide open this Kentucky Derby is this year, that I think you can go 8, 9 deep and make really, really legitimate arguments for who's going to win the Kentucky Derby this year.
Awesome. Thanks so much for doing this series, Matt.
Well, thanks so much for doing it with me, Colin. This is a blast. Can't wait to do this again at the Breeders' Cup. And then we're going to have a lot more horses and a lot more trainers to talk about for then.
That is right. Please like and subscribe. Thank you so much to all of your support. Comment in the section below on what you think of the Tim Yakteen Barn Tour. And until next time,
it's now post time.